Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Weor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of all the world's great religions. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Each Saturday, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.
In the previous lectures, we were describing for you how the elements are related to our spiritual growth. We discussed the four primary elements, or four basic elements, which are the air, the fire, the water, and the earth. And how in all the ancient mystical traditions, it has been symbolized that these four elements are just particularizations or condensations of a single element, of one root substance. And that one root substance has had many names as well, many symbols and veils. In India, it's called Akash. It can also be rightly called Prakriti. In the West, it's been called ether. It has also been called quintessence, which literally translated means the fifth element. And the quintessence refers to that primordial substance at the base of all things. And what all the ancient traditions have said, to repeat some of what was said in the earlier lectures, is that any compound element, any aggregated thing, which includes everything about us, if that aggregated thing is destroyed, it returns back to its primordial root. And we see that's true of the body. When the body is destroyed, that body returns back to its elements. When a tree dies, when an animal dies, nature breaks it down. It casts out impurities and recovers the energy in order to create something new. And we see this cycle in all things, in all levels of nature. So these four elements are destroyed, purified, and returned back to that quintessence. Just on a purely mechanical level, this is happening constantly. It's happening right now as you breathe, as you digest food and liquid. Your body is performing this process constantly. All of the cells and organs in your body are engaged in this process, which symbolically stated or represented in different symbols in nature or in religion is also depicted as cycles of life and death, cycles of evolution, where the energy becomes complicated and form and matter is established. Then that form and matter is maintained for a brief period, and then it is destroyed. It is devolved. It is broken back down to its source element. And so we see this cycle in all things. This is the function of nature. This is how nature works. The important factor to remember here is that these elements are impermanent. They are impermanent. We are impermanent. At our current level of development, everything that we directly perceive and deal with is impermanent because we are asleep. We are filled with impurity. Impurity, translated another way or stated another way, is that we are constructed out of elements that are improperly formed, that have no true longevity. Not even our body. Not even our mind. Our mind is highly unstable, highly unreliable, subject to very easy influence from negative forces. We are very quick to become angry, very quick to become distressed or stressed, anxious, afraid, inflamed with passion, depressed, elated. Our mind is highly unstable. It is highly unreliable. It has no longevity, no strength. The mind itself is composed of these four elements as well. Not physical elements, but psychological, spiritual. So that's why in the earlier lectures we were describing how in the process of spiritual development we learn to work with these four elements, to understand them, to comprehend them, and to learn to master them, so that we as a psyche can become stable, capable of withstanding the influence of the elements. In fact, becoming capable of commanding the elements and no longer controlled by them. And that is both physically and psychologically, but especially psychologically. So that's the basis of this work. It is to work in our laboratory. And we see in this very beginning image the alchemist in his laboratory, seated before the athanor, the furnace, the alchemist's oven. It would be absurd for an alchemist to work with an oven that was cold, that had no heat, no fire. The fire that needs to fill that oven is not the fire of this particularized aggregate of fire, or the element fire of the four elements. Because that element fire is not permanent. It is a crude form of fire. It is not the quintessence. You see, the quintessence, the akash, is the root of all four elements, and thus it is all the elements. The akash is fire. That is liquid, that is airy and highly mobile, and it also has the stability and longevity of earth. The akash has all the four elements perfected. It is a perfect fire. That is the fire that burns in the furnace or oven of the alchemist. And you see here that he stimulates that fire with a bellows, with air. That is also akash. But in this case, that air is called prana. Not physical air. The energy of the air, or what in Tibetan is called lu, lung, the wind. In Sanskrit, it is the root of vayu, the wind, not physical wind, not the breath in the body, but the energy in the breath, the prana. The alchemist here is not a terrestrial person as well. This image is symbolic. The alchemist here being bearded, being an old man, is our innermost. Our inner Buddha, our inner God, who drives the fire, who gives it wind, who gives it energy in order to perform his work in the laboratory. We told you previously about the laboratory. And we looked at some images of laboratories. To remind you, here are a few. And we see in these symbolic images many workers with lots of very confusing and complicated devices, accompanied by very confusing and complicated scriptures and writings about alchemy that are filled with hugely enigmatic phrases, statements, words, symbols that bewilder the intellect. And it was all precisely to hide a great power, a terrifically divine science. These images are not literal, to repeat what we've been repeating. These workers do not represent physical people working in a physical laboratory. They represent elemental forces that are at work inside of us. And all of these vessels and this oven and these alembics and all the different tools represent something in us. They represent our body. You see the vessels of the alchemist, the fires, the vessels, the water, the air, all represent the organs. Don't you recognize that all those alembics and vials and vessels are in the shape of your heart, your lungs, your liver, your kidneys, your endocrine glands, your sexual organs, your brain? All of these forces and energies that are at work in the laboratory represent the forces and energies that are at work in your body and in your mind. This is the real meaning of alchemy. Your laboratory is yourself. The alchemist is your innermost, who applies forces and energies to us in order to derive a particular result, in order to create, in order to perfect us. Unfortunately, we don't cooperate. We do not realize that this symbol here in the center, the oven with the rounded vessel with the tall, skinny, fluted top, represents our body and mind. And that stove at the bottom is our sexual organs, filled with a fire, with heat of the Akash, which when heated and tempered, by following the advice of Hermes Trismegistus, who said in his emerald tablet, with a gentle heat, with much attention, we work. That gentle heat is the fire of Akash that emerges through our sexuality, that heats the water of the glands, of the heart, of the brain, causing steam, transformed water and air. In other words, what Jesus said, to be born again of water and spirit. Those elements rise up the spinal column. In India, they call this Kundalini or Dumo or Kandali. Many names for this energy. And here we see in that vessel Ida and Pingala, Od and Obd, the two channels of energy that move alongside the caduceus of Mercury, and in the center is the spine itself. These are Adam and Eve, working in harmony with the forces of red and white, those two channels, solar and lunar. And the heating of that water and the containing of that energy in the vessel, sealed to let no energy escape, causes a process of awakening, where the energy becomes concentrated and rises. These symbols represent ourselves. Not vessels in a physical laboratory, but the vessel of the body. the vessels of the organs, and the mind, and the heart. And you see in each case that these vessels are well sealed. Nothing is escaping. There are no openings anywhere for the energy to leave. We aren't like that. We waste all of our energy every day. And that's why at the end of every day, we're completely exhausted. So the point of our studies is represented here in this statement from Samael Aun Weor, who wrote in his book, Fundamentals of Gnostic Education, the revolutionary psychology of all Gnostic movements is based on the study of the different types of energies that operate within the human organism and within nature. Evolving, devolving, and neutral forces exist within the psycho-physiological laboratory of the human organism. These forces must be studied and profoundly comprehended. The purpose of alchemy is to help us perfect ourselves. Perfection implies the removal of all that is impure. And we are filled with a lot of impurity. In order to purify ourselves, we have to study the forces and energies that move in our laboratory, which is psycho-physiological. It is psychological and physical. In order to study how these energies, the earth, the water, the fire, the air, the Akash, evolve and devolve, how they flow, how they move, how they change, how we interact with them as a consciousness. This is the purpose of this science. Unfortunately, up till now, we have remained in 100% complete ignorance of these energies and forces. We take everything for granted. We are asleep. We think we're very intelligent and very smart, but the reality is we are deepening our suffering on a daily basis in complete ignorance of that fact. This graphic represents our psycho-physiological laboratory. It is a very complicated machine. We're constantly using it and transforming energy in complete ignorance of how we do it. Be here right now. Feel the body that you're in. Be aware that you have 5 senses that are fully active and are transforming energy right now. You're hearing the sound of my voice. That is the energy that is transformed through the sense of sound, of hearing. You are also seeing, looking at the graphic, or looking at me, or if you're listening to the radio, looking at the room you're in. That's 2 senses, fully active. A lot of information constantly coming in. You also have the sense of touch, which you may be completely unaware of until I mention it. But your body feels a lot, both inside of it and around it. The sense of taste is probably latent unless you're eating or drinking something. And also the sense of smell. All of these senses are constantly engaged. But there's another sense about which we completely ignore, but which actually is the most powerful. And that is the sense of imagination. It is the mirror of the mind's eye. It is where all of that sensory data is first reflected. Where you contemplate or analyze or react to the other sensory data that's coming in. If you're uncomfortable in the chair, in your imagination you're getting the thoughts and feelings. This chair is uncomfortable. Maybe I should move to that other chair. And then you imagine how that other chair will feel. Or my coffee doesn't taste very good. I need more sugar or I need more milk. And then you imagine how much better it will be with that other sugar or that other milk. So you see, that sensory data is constantly reflecting in the imagination. And all of that information is flowing through the 3 brains. The intellect, which is where we process thought. The emotional brain, where we process our feelings of like and dislike, joy and displeasure. And also the motor instinctive sexual brain, which is where the most base sensations flow. So there's a huge process, movement of energy happening in our three brains in relation with our five senses, constantly, from moment to moment, about which we generally have no awareness. So I invite you now to become aware of that. To become aware of everything that's happening in your own laboratory. How all the data that's coming through your senses is reflecting inside of you, and how you are reacting to it. This is the beginning of the work in the alchemist laboratory. Your laboratory is your body and your mind. The purpose of the laboratory is to transform energy. The question is, who's in charge of the transformation? Who decides how the energy is transformed? Who is in charge of our psychochemical physiological laboratory? Generally speaking, we are not in charge of our own laboratory. We leave the job to a secretary of sorts who does the job automatically for us, and we just sort of let things happen without any real influence over the process or the result. So whenever we are active in our lives, we're taking in all this sensory data and combining that with the data that we are processing in our imagination through our fantasies, through our daydreams, through our memories, through our wishes and longings. And all of that data is fed into our three brains. Of particular importance here is that these three brains are just transformers of energy. They have no inherent intelligence. They are just machines. Energy is put into them. Energy is transformed. That's all. The intellect is just a machine. The only thing the intellect does is compare. That's all it does. It compares A and B. Yes and no, black and white. And we have this strong tendency now, culturally, to rely very heavily on the intellect. And we flip in this intellectual way in our extremes. Today, we love our politician, the one that we picked, who says A and A and A and A and A in agreement with all of our A's. But the moment that politician says B, our entire perception of that politician flips to B, and we hate them. We are unable to see two things at once, apparent contradictions, to hold things as more subtle, to understand things as deeper, as more complicated. We have the tendency now to flip from one side to the other. This is a very intellectual tendency. It's an all or nothing type of point of view. So a person may have done 100 good things to help us, but when they do one thing that we don't like, we cut them out of our life. We talk bad about them, we criticize them, we gossip about them, we hate them. This is this tendency. We all do that in our own ways. A similar tendency exists in the emotional center, but it's a little more subtle and not quite as dramatic. And also in the third brain, the motor instinctive sexual brain, we have a similar tendency, a pendulum. The key here is that all of these three brains simply transform energy. We're constantly transforming, receiving energy. Like that. Excuse me. But not really in control or aware of how we're transforming that energy. We hear things, we see things, we smell and taste things, and we measure them based on the reactions of our three brains. And those reactions are determined by what? We don't know. We have no real knowledge of what's happening inside of us, chemically, physically, but especially psychologically. We have no real knowledge of it. To us, everything is just happening. And for us, life is just about acquiring as much pleasure as we possibly can. Pleasure physically and pleasure psychologically. Our primary interest is to please our sense of touch, to please our sense of taste, to please our sense of smell and our sense of sight and sound, and to indulge our imagination as much as possible until we die. That's pretty much how we see life. And that's exactly why the world is falling into complete decay and disorder. Because that point of view is completely out of balance with nature. That point of view transforms enormous amounts of energy and feeds desire. What in the Bible is called Ra in Hebrew. Ra means pollution, impurity. Ra is the duality of the tree of knowledge. The tree of knowledge is Etzva Da'at Tob Ve'Ra in Hebrew. The tree of knowledge of purity and impurity, of goodness and pollution. And when Adam and Eve ate of that tree of knowledge, against the commands of the Elohim, they ate of the impurity. They indulged in the impurity, in desire, because of curiosity. And the result was suffering. They left Eden, which literally translated means bliss, and were cast into the wilderness to suffer pain. That is a karmic consequence, cause and effect. That process is happening in us today. Adam and Eve are symbolic, not only of an ancient humanity, but of forces that are in our psychochemical makeup. We've told you many times that Adam represents the intellect, the brain, and that Heva, or Eve, represents sexuality. Heva, Eve, sexuality through the senses, tastes of desire, and gives that fruit to the brain, to the nervous system. And we develop a taste for it. And we don't care about the suffering that ensues. This is why the Buddha Shakyamuni came and taught his Four Noble Truths. The first Noble Truth states, there is suffering. And the second Noble Truth states, the cause of suffering is desire. And we ignore that. We don't care. We want what we want, and we don't care about the cost. A student of alchemy learns, instead, to see desire for what it is. A temptation, an illusion. Elements in motion, but that are impermanent and unreliable. A student of alchemy learns to see that this laboratory has the potential to transform energy. But it doesn't always have to be a transformation that results in suffering. It can be a transformation that results in wisdom. It is possible to receive the same energies as everyone else and transform them into something of benefit instead of something that propagates ignorance, craving, and aversion. The student of alchemy learns, just the same as the student of yoga and dharma, that the key is to learn how to deal with sensations. Not only physical or external sensations, but psychological sensations. To learn to transform them consciously. Not just to be a machine addicted to sensations and controlled by sensations, but to be a human being who controls the sensations and their relationship with them. This is a great transformation. So the student of alchemy, dharma, yoga, gnosis, whatever you want to call it, learns to be constantly aware of this laboratory. In other words, to be awake and aware in the laboratory. To be in charge of the laboratory. To be constantly watching everything that's coming into the laboratory. And to constantly, consciously transform that energy through prayer, through remembrance of the divine, through the knowledge of what is possible for a human being to achieve. Not just to be another animal, addicted to lust, inflamed and consumed by anger and envy, but free of those discursive qualities, filled instead with chastity, with love, with patience, with humility, with great diligence, and the complete willingness to work to help humanity become better. That is possible if we learn to transform energy. That's why in the alchemical images we see that these vessels are perfectly sealed. That represents that all of the energy in the laboratory is kept contained, not wasted. Not wasted and thrown out. Not expelled. But every little atom of energy is harnessed, kept in the laboratory, and transformed. In the Mahabharata, which is an ancient scripture of India, there's a very beautiful description of this alchemical process. But it was too long for me to read to you. In synthesis, what this teaching in the Mahabharata states is that the yogi, instead of being a machine and reacting to and being enslaved by desire, instead becomes like a tortoise. A tortoise in a shell who withdraws all of its limbs into the shell. In other words, draws all the energy through all the senses into itself and holds it there and remembers God and doesn't react. Instead, restrains the senses, controls them, and contemplates itself. Does not contemplate its addiction to lust, its desire for sex, for revenge, for profit, for attention and recognition, but instead contemplates its own nature. When those sensations are attacking, instead of being distracted by those sensations and wanting to fulfill the desires of those sensations, the yogi looks at itself and says, I'm here, I'm me. I'm related to my being. I'm part of my being. Why do I need the recognition of others? Why do I need envy? Why do I need revenge? When God is here. Perfect fulfillment is here. Eden is inside. Heaven, nirvana. It isn't found in the senses. It's found inside. Stated another way, the way the Buddha taught, The dharmic practitioner restrains the senses and controls them and thereby transforms their experience of life. No longer victimized by sensations, no longer controlled by them or swayed by them, but instead comprehends them, understands them. So the work of the alchemist begins here and now in the moment. Receiving all sensations and impressions and remembering itself. Remembering. Well, that might taste good, but what will be the result of indulging in that taste? If I eat or drink that sensation that I want, what will it cause to happen in my laboratory? What will be the result of that transformation? This is what we need to be cognizant of. We need to select the impressions that we bring into our laboratory. Because right now, we select them mechanically, guided by desire. We pick impressions because we want to sustain our lust. We pick impressions because we want to nourish our anger. We want to feed our envy. We want to bury our fear or our insecurity. We want recognition. We want attention. So we select impressions to feed those addictions. The alchemist, the Kabbalist, the Gnostic, the practitioner of Dharma or yoga instead says, if I take that sensation in myself, what will it transform? What will it become? We become what we eat. And even knowing that, we eat garbage. Even having heard that you become what you eat thing, we still eat junk. Food that isn't food. But we do it even more with the food that we eat psychologically, through the other senses. We're addicted to our sense of taste, and we know alcohol is bad, and we know cigarettes are bad, and we know drugs are bad, and we know fast food is bad, and we know the chemicals are bad, and we know that the pollution is bad, and all the things that are in our food, and all the substances that we are easily addicted to, but we still eat it. And all of those atoms, the energies, in other words, the air, the fire, the water, and the earth, in those forms of matter, are assimilated into the body and become our body, and that's why we are sick. And that's why we are weak. And that's why we are very easy to manipulate. Because we have no strength, even physically. Our food supply is corrupted, our water supply is corrupted, our air is corrupted. Worse, we pile on top of all that corruption food that is not food. Food that comes out of boxes, cans, food that has no natural elements, food that is filled with chemicals, which kill us. But we don't care because it tastes good, because it's convenient, because it's cheap. Worse than that is we do it through our sense of scent, sight, sound, and touch. And of course, imagination. 99% of what's on television is psychological food that kills us. Everything in the movies is corrupted food for the psyche. The vast majority of the music is corrupted food for the psyche that stimulates inferior pleasures and desires. It does not stimulate the consciousness towards unity with the divine. Instead, it stimulates attraction to materialism, which is death for the soul. Similarly, with our interactions with others, we want the impressions through our sight, sound, scent, taste, and touch that give us social engagement, social appreciation, security, recognition, stature, with no recognition of the actual harm of those elements. And of course, in our imagination, we do all of this to an even greater degree, always indulging in our fantasies for the future, our longings for revenge, for redemption socially, How much of the time do we put elements into our laboratory that stimulate our longing for the divine? Be honest with yourself. Analyze your psychological state. What is it composed of? A lot of stress? A lot of dissatisfaction? A lot of longings for things that you will probably never have? A lot of empty feelings of disconnection and loneliness? Dissatisfactions in your relationships, in your career, in your skills, in your education, in your life in general? All of those feelings are precisely a result of the elements that have been put into your laboratory and transformed by you. We want happiness. We want fulfillment. We want contentment. We want to feel successful, loved, appreciated. We want to feel needed. We don't feel those things because we have not worked in our laboratory in the right way. We have worked instead for selfishness, for sensual pleasure. We have not worked on the right foundation. In order to acquire the right foundation, we need to vastly revolutionize how we work in our laboratory. And that begins with choosing impressions, selecting impressions, being aware of ourselves and knowing how to change it. When you're feeling negative, when you're feeling dark, angry, depressed, deflated, dissatisfied, you need to analyze why. What energy has been transforming in your laboratory that has caused that state to emerge? It has not happened by chance. It has not happened as a punishment from God. It has happened because of how you have transformed impressions, either with your thinking, your feeling, or your body. And thus, it's also in your hands to change it for a better state. We learn to select impressions so that we can manage the states of our consciousness. When you're feeling those things, you need to take in good impressions. When you're feeling overwhelmed with life, burdened with pain, with desires, with your suffering, take in good impressions. Learn and find those positive impressions that stimulate your consciousness to activity and that bring serenity to your heart. Go into nature. Go to the woods, to the beach, to the countryside. Forget your problems. Stop thinking about things obsessively. Pay attention to what's around you. Look closely into the face of your children, your parents. See them for who they are and love them. Look closely at the flower, at the tree, at the cloud, and realize its beauty. Stop looking so obsessively at your desires, your failures, your successes, and grasping onto them. Be here and now. And a great deal of your suffering will just evaporate. Most of what we have as suffering is self-created, self-produced, and completely unnecessary. We do it to ourselves. In the Mahabharata, it states, every existent object is dissolved into that from which it is produced. That statement is pure alchemy, but it comes from India. The Mahabharata is one of the oldest and longest poems on the planet. It's thousands of years old. And yet here this statement is pure alchemy, which people think only came in Europe 500 years ago. Pure alchemy. Every existent object is dissolved into that from which it is produced. If you comprehend this statement very well, you will easily learn to select impressions and to conquer your desires and to conquer the chains that afflict you, that you yourself put on to yourself. You will start to understand that this every existent object is not physical objects. It includes them. But it's primarily focused on psychological, spiritual conditions. Our suffering is caused by psychological desires. Those desires are impermanent. They exist now because we are the ones sustaining them with our energies every day, feeding those desires the way we've been doing for lifetimes. To be free from those desires is to first stop feeding them, to see them for what they are, and to begin to realize that they are impermanent. They will be dissolved. It's only a question of when and how. We can choose not to deal with them now. That's our choice. We have every right to that. God respects our will. But eventually, once those desires, that knot of suffering becomes too heavy, nature has no choice but to dissolve it for us, out of compassion from God. We call that process hell. It's the process through which all that energy that we have established is taken back by nature, and our soul is purified. The impurities are cleansed away, the purities are taken out. It's a great process of fire and heat and pressure, and it's very uncomfortable. That is necessary. The other option is to do it ourselves. That's what we call the path to liberation from suffering. To consciously dissolve the causes of suffering in our own mind, in our own heart, in our body, through the application of heat and pressure, the application of the Akash, the real fire, learning to harness it. Every existent object is dissolved into that from which it is produced. Everything about us will be dissolved. It doesn't matter how many surgeries you get to look beautiful, you will decay and die. You can get all the surgeries you want. You can wear all the makeup you want. You can spend all of your time and money on your wardrobe, on your car, on everything about your appearance. But you will age, you will decay, and you will die. And you will have wasted your life. Because you will go out of this life worse than when you came in. Because you will have changed nothing truly fundamental about yourself. You have worsened your karma. Everything is constantly changing. And it's up to you whether it changes for better or worse. When you understand that every existent object is dissolved into that from which it's produced, you understand this, that these four elements, compounded elements, are returned back to their original source. But they aren't the same. Nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly changing. Once you've had a certain type of experience, you are forever changed. All of your experiences change you. As many times as you've died and been reborn, you have never remained the same because you've acquired new experience. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. When you understand that, you know then that that New Age idea that all humanity will eventually inevitably become angels is a complete lie. It's a beautiful fantasy, but it is just a fantasy. No one enters heaven automatically. No one evolves into a god because of the action of nature. A god is self-produced. A master is a master of himself and of nature. This is not handed out to us for free. It has to be earned. It has to be fought for. One has to die to receive it. And that death is psychological. All the impurity has to die. You see, this phrase hides something. It hides something very profound. But the eyes of the flesh cannot see it. That phrase says, every existent object is dissolved into that from which it was produced. But what about the non-existent objects? What about those things that are made from things that are not impermanent? What about that which always is? That which cannot be dissolved? That which does not become compounded and then dissolved again? What about that produces the continuity of all things? If all compounded things emerge into forms and are dissolved out of forms, what sustains that? Something must sustain it. There must be a field or an environment or an energy or something that allows that to occur. A space. What is that? That is also inside of us. That is also something that we can learn about and taste and touch and become. In the Bible, that is hidden in the Gospels or in the early scriptures as eheye asher eheye in Hebrew. I am that which is becoming. It's the name of God that he speaks to Moses. I am he who becomes. I am becoming. In Sanskrit terminology, this is shunyata. This is the Ein Sof. This is the emptiness in Buddhist terms. Samantabhadra in Sanskrit. Adi Buddha. That which is becoming, that which is non-existent, but yet exists. That's why the Buddha said, all compound things must be dissolved again. Seek ye for that which is permanent and work out your salvation with diligence. You see, alchemy is not just restricted to Europe. Alchemy is a universal teaching. The Buddha here is teaching exactly the science of alchemy. All compound things must be dissolved again. Seek ye for that which is permanent and work out your salvation with diligence. What is permanent? What is compound? Paracelsus explains it this way. Destruction perfects that which is good, for the good cannot appear on account of that which conceals it. The good is least good whilst it is thus concealed. The concealment must be removed so that the good may be able to freely appear in its own brightness. What is the good? It is the opposite of Ra. Et svedat tovera. The tree of knowledge of purity and impurity. Tob is goodness in Hebrew. Ra is impurity. Evil is how it used to be translated, good and evil. But really the terms should be pollution and purity. Paracelsus here is addressing that. The good cannot appear on account of that which conceals it. Look into yourself. I know that we all think that we're very good. But let's be realistic. Let's be honest. Let's look at our lives in the context of what we know about spirituality and religion. If we were good, honestly speaking, we would be in nirvana already. If we were truly good, we would be in heaven. We would not be here suffering. We would not be in spiritual darkness, in ignorance, suffering so many afflictions, physically and psychologically. It would be completely illogical for the good to be persecuted just because. It makes no sense. If we are persecuted, it's because we deserve it. If we are suffering, it's because the causes are in us. We suffer because we are carrying the causes of it. No one else. And if we free ourselves of those causes, we no longer suffer. This is the teaching of every great religion. Paracelsus is saying it here. Destruction perfects that which is good. How does God help us reach perfection? He destroys our impurities, either with our help or without it. Right now, we're not helping. We're not. We're destroying each other. We're destroying this planet. We only care about our desires at any cost. We don't care what it costs anyone or anything. We don't care as long as we get what we want. It says here that the concealment must be removed so that the good may be able to freely appear in its own brightness. Paracelsus is pointing out here that in order for us to reach true goodness, we have to remove what conceals it. In other words, we need to remove what we call the ego, our defects. All of those psychological compounds that trap our potential goodness. In us is a potential master, Buddha, angel, alchemist. Potential, but not realized. If that were realized, we would have power over the elements. Unmistakable power, both inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves. Let's be honest. If you don't have it, be honest. If you lie to yourself about this, you will never escape the darkness. To acquire that, you have to seek it. And that seeking is inside. It is to find what must be destroyed in order to free the goodness. So the entirety of alchemy is about that. Learning to transform energy in order to free the goodness. We showed you this image earlier, which is from Atlanta Fusions by Michael Meyer. And this image shows the work that we have to perform. We see here 5 figures. The 4 on the left represent the 4 elements: the fire, the wind, the water, the earth. Those are the compound elements. And the one on the right represents the Akash. Willpower. That's the club of Heracles, the solar god, the solar hero. Heracles in Greek means the light of Hera, the goddess. And that is what the Akash is. It is the light or fire, the Kundalini of the Divine Mother. Hera. This is willpower. Conscious willpower. To look in the face of the elements and to transform them in accordance with the laws of the divine, not in accordance with desire. And that is a daily psychological process through which we confront all of our impressions and transform them by will. Everything that we experience in life, we have to analyze and transform. And if you take this work seriously, you will face these elements every day. By taking the work seriously, what I mean is this: you must have a fire in your oven. If there is no fire burning in your athanor, you're not working in this work. That fire is the fire of Akash, which is transmuted sexual energy. If that fire is not working in your inner laboratory, in your sexual organs, and in your spinal column, then you're not working yet. You're what's called in the alchemical language a puffer, a blower. Someone who blows hot air but has no heat. Someone who has no fire but is just filled with air, vapor. Don't be a puffer. To really work in alchemy, you need to have fire in your oven. Transmuting your sexual energy, not wasting it. Not wasting it physically, emotionally, mentally. Not through imagination or action physically, but conserving all of it and transforming all of it. When that happens, you're gathering these forces in your laboratory. Remember, the Akash is the root of all these energies. That means that when you face these ordeals, when you have challenges in your life related to the elements, which we explained in the first 2 lectures, you will have energy to transform them. A lot of energy. More than you've probably ever experienced. And it's a process of learning how to manage it. It is not easy. You have to learn through trial and error, through experience. We learn to deal with these elements psychologically and spiritually by recognizing their qualities as they act in our lives. In other words, related to our situations, to the events of our life, to our circumstances, we learn to transform the mobility of the air. We learn to transform the temperature of the fire, the fluidity of water, and the solidity of the earth. And we learn to do that by always being expansive. The expansiveness is the quality of the space or Akash. In other words, you develop a capacity of conscious attention in the moment that can handle anything, that is so encompassing, so expansive, that you never become disturbed. You never become disequilibrated. Whatever impressions arise, you see it. You see that it is a compound of different elemental forces, more or less mobile, more or less hot or cold, more or less fluid or solid. It is all impermanent. And you seek inside of it its heart. The wisdom, the knowledge that you can extract from every experience in your life. Let's give an example. You might be living in a situation where you have no stability. Your job is in question. Your financial situation is on the rocks, so to speak. This is an ordeal of earth. The solidity of your situation is very unstable. And this makes you afraid for your security, for your family's security, for your future. And perhaps at the same time, your job is in question because you're being criticized. That's fire. Temperature. The temperature is hot. People are criticizing you. And perhaps that criticism is floating around in the forms of different types of gossip. That's also fire. But that fire moves through the air. It is highly mobile. It's spreading. And that whole situation is making you emotionally very unstable. You're quick to anger, quick to be depressed, highly reactive. That's water. So you see, that one stimulant in your circumstances brings all the elements to play against you. And normally what we would do is we would run around like a chicken with our head cut off, not able to sleep, very tense, trying to convince everybody that we're a good person, that we should keep our job and we shouldn't be fired, and we'll do anything. We'll even take a cut in pay, whatever it is, desperate, because we're not looking in the face of the cause of the problem, which is ourselves. Maybe the gossip is right. Maybe we did something we shouldn't have done. Maybe we should apologize. Whatever the nature of the situation, we have to look it honestly in the face. Mostly, we have to keep an expansive attitude that remembers God and that says, God's in charge. God's giving me this to learn about myself. The criticism is showing me my pride. And I need to eliminate that pride because it causes suffering. The situation with my job is showing me that I'm attached to materialism and that I don't trust God. And that I really don't have a spiritual bone in my body. So we learn to take situations and ordeals for what they truly are and learn to transform them consciously. You see, if we have a problem like that, we can't solve it when our mind is chaotic. The mind gets tied up in knots, and its vision gets more and more narrow. Have you ever noticed that? When you get really angry, your vision gets extremely narrow, and you can only see through your anger. And when you're afraid for your job, your vision gets extremely narrow. You can't see the whole picture anymore. You're only seeing through your fear. To solve that problem, you have to see past the immediate circumstance. You need an expansive point of view that sees more than your selfish desire, more than your fear, more than your envy, more than your pride and your anger. You need to see the totality. You need to see everything. You need to be relaxed. This is why Jesus said, observe the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They don't worry about what they're going to eat or what they're going to wear, and God clothes them and cares for them perfectly well. How much more does God love you than the birds and flowers? God will care for you, will clothe you, will feed you. You're being tested, tempted, tested. Remember God. Develop this expansive consciousness that sees with a bigger picture. This is how you awaken. This is how you weaken the power of those elements over you, and you develop power over them. It is not easy. Every day we are tested and we fail. But we succeed by learning what Hermes Trismegistus taught. Separate that spiritus earth from the denser crude by means of a gentle heat with much attention. This is from the Emerald Tablet, perhaps one of the most important documents of alchemy, alongside Genesis and Revelation. The spiritus earth. We told you before that the earth is us. But to be spiritus is to have the spirit inside. Here. That is to be cognizant, conscious, awake. Here and now, remembering our divinity. And when you are here and now remembering your divinity, awake, aware, you can separate yourself, your essence, consciousness, from the dense or crude, which are these elements condensed into ego, air, fire, water, and earth, pride, envy, gluttony, greed, fear, etc. By means of a gentle heat with much attention. That heat is the heat of Akash, the heat of transformed sexual energy that feeds the consciousness to be here and now. In other words, what you learn is to separate the subtle from the dense. The dense or crude are all of our desires. They are very dense, crude metals, impure, heavy. Pride, envy, lust, anger. All of these are very heavy psychologically. They trap us. They are the chains, the cages that bind us. With that gentle heat, with much attention, by facing our ordeals every day and reflecting on them, we start to separate our consciousness from that. This is the nature of real alchemy. That's what's shown here. These two images are nearly identical. but they come from opposite sides of the planet from hundreds of years ago, before there was an internet or even mail. The image on the left is from a book called Aurora Consurgens, which is dated to sometime in the 14 or 1500s. It's from a book of alchemy. The drawings in this book represent how alchemy was being taught at that time, as veiled in a lot of very dense symbolism. And this image shows a woman in the form of a serpent who bears an axe on her shoulder, and she has a six-pointed halo. The six-pointed star represents Venus, the goddess of love. The axe is obvious. It's a symbol of the executioner of death. And her lower body is a coiled serpent. If you've ever studied the Greek mythology, you know that this is a symbol of Athena, whose symbol is a serpent. She stands before two bodies lying on the ground, one red and one white. These are Adam and Eve. And they are both beheaded by her axe. The red and the white represent solar and lunar forces in us. And these have many levels of application and importance. And of significance in this drawing, aside from the decapitation and that she's extracting elements from these bodies, is in the back a vessel with 4 flowers in it that's being heated by a fire. There you see the 4 elements and the Akash. Those 4 flowers represent the 4 compounded elements of air, fire, water, and earth. And the fire that heats them is the Akash, which is her fire, the Divine Mother's fire. This image represents the psychological work of alchemy. We must pass through decapitation like John the Baptist to humble ourselves before the will of God so the goddess can take that ego, the I, the head, and take back the energy that belongs to the divine. That's why these 4 elements have to be heated in a vessel so they can be reduced back to their original source. This is how the pure is extracted from the impure. The subtle is separated from the dense. This is a psychological process, a daily process. The same image is represented here in an image from Hindu Tantra, which shows the Divine Mother Kali Ma, who is the wife of Shiva. Her name means the Black One. She is the Divine Mother, but in the aspect of the Divine Mother death, who is the aspect we need to kill our impurities, to free us from being trapped in suffering. The symbol is nearly identical. 2 bodies lying next to each other. She stands upon them and grasps the severed head in her hand with a sword in her other hand. That Divine Mother is inside of us. She is the Akash. She is this energy. She is Hera. She is Hecate, the Divine Mother Death, who can purify us of all our impurities if we work with her. And that's why in the Hindu image, you see that around her neck, she wears a necklace of heads. And those are all of our defects. She is garlanded with the egos that she has successfully consumed. And that's why she has blood on her hands and mouth, because she takes that energy to transform it, to consume it, to purify it, out of compassion for us. This is the work that we need to learn to do. This image is from Europe, from around the same time period, 1400s, mid-1400s. This was prepared by a Franciscan monk who happened to know alchemy. This book is from a book called the Book of the Holy Trinity. Same images are hidden here. In this case, we see the Divine Mother as a serpent woman bearing the shield or the spear of Athena and stabbing Adam in the heart. Adam represents our mind. And above that, we see the soul on the wheel of suffering, being purged. And on this side, we see the beheading of the soul in order for it to be purified. And over there, the vessel. So these teachings have been hidden in our faces for many, many centuries. Another symbol, also from Aurora Consurgens, shows three figures, one dead on the ground and one rising out of a coffin. And about it, it states this: "Take his soul and return it to him, for the corruption and destruction of the one thing is the birth of the other. This means rob him of the destructive moisture and augment it with his natural moisture, which will be his completion and his life." This phrase hides the same teaching. It's revealed in the nature of the drawing. In the center of the drawing, we see a warrior. That warrior is, in Kabbalah, Tiferet, the human soul, who in the Arthurian mysteries was represented as Lancelot. In the Mahabharata, he is Arjuna, the warrior who fights on behalf of God, or King Arthur. This warrior, or knight, has killed himself using the sword of his willpower, the Akash. And through that death, we see a soul emerging out of the mouth of the dead man. The knight takes that soul and is feeding it into the same man himself who's in the coffin. This image represents precisely what we're talking about. It's the psychological work. Through the willpower of cognizant, present attention, we observe and analyze our defects. We take the power from them. We take their life from them. We no longer give them energy. We no longer give them chai, Hebrew for life. We give them death. We slay our defects with the sword that the Divine Mother provides to us, the same way she did with Perseus and Theseus and Odysseus and all the other heroes. From that dead psychological element, we extract its essence, the knowledge hidden in it, the consciousness hidden in it, the purity that was concealed in it. And we give that to the soul, to that which is being born in us, to that which should be enlivened in us, that which is pure, that which will resurrect from the grave. Very beautiful representation of alchemy in this image. And likewise, it is reflected here. This is my favorite one. This image has been around for a long time also. This one's from 1526. 500 years old. Nobody's understood it. There are a lot of explanations written about it, but none are true and practical because the real teachings have not been revealed until recent decades. This case, the soldier here in the middle is Saturn. Saturn is the seventh of the seven spirits before the throne. Saturn is the old man of death, the one who completes the cycle. Cycles are begun with the first of the seven, which is the moon, birth. Death, or Saturn, is the end. This old man in armor is Saturn, death. In Greek mysteries, Saturn consumes his children. And that's what we see here. Saturn here represents those energies or forces in us related with the death of the ego, the death of anything. In this case, we see that behind him, on his shoulders, is a beautiful maiden. This is Buddhi in Sanskrit, Gebra in Kabbalah, Guinevere in the Arthurian mysteries, Helen amongst the Greeks, Beatrice for Dante. She is the divine soul, the consciousness not trapped in ego. She is buddhi, that reflective part of the consciousness that can see the truth. She is weighing the children of Saturn on her scales. The ones waiting to be weighed are up at the top right corner. They are in vessels, trapped. Those are our egos. Our energies, which should be pure, which should be perfect, but are trapped in those vessels and thus caged. She takes them one by one, weighs them in her scales in order to analyze them, to properly understand them, feeds them to Saturn, who consumes them, who digests them. That's why the sword is through his belly. The sword is willpower, kundalini, akash. When he consumes them, he vomits them back out, pure, free of the cage, free of the vessel. And they gradually, through a process of purification and redemption, pass through the fire and emerge in a baptismal font where they are received by the Elohim, by the Divine Mother and the Divine Father inside of us. And they are once again united in their proper place in our consciousness. This image represents the whole totality of the spiritual psychological work in alchemy. And you see what feeds this water is the spray of blood from the belly of Saturn, where the sword of the Kundalini has liberated his energy in order to cause the process of awakening. A very profound drawing. Hard to read, but if you meditate, easy to understand. So this image shows us the work that we need to do on a daily basis. It is to purify ourselves. The work is simplified in this statement from Paracelsus. What is the part of the artist in this operation? The artist must do nothing but separate that which is subtle from that which is gross. Separate. But listen, this can't be done unless there's a fire in the oven. You need a gentle heat with much attention. Do you have any questions?
The sword that was just shown in that image,
Mm-hmm.
the alchemy,
Mm-hmm.
is that sword the same as what we would see in Jesus of Nazareth's story with the sort of, or the lance of Longinus?
It's the exact same as the lance of Longinus. Yep. It's also the same as the sword Excalibur that's drawn from the stone. The stone is yasod in Hebrew, or what in Christian terms is called Peter or patar. It's the stone that the foundation is built on, which is here at the base of the spine. That's why the sword is there at the base of his spine. And the side brought forth the blood and water, which is where the resurrection occurs. And that's what you're seeing here. The blood mixes with the water in this vessel. This vessel is the soul. It's us. And that's how the resurrection occurs. Resurrection, the body comes out pure and clean and reunites with the divine in Eden. Beautiful, right? It's all there. Any questions back here?
This is in regards to the example you gave. You said that might taste good if I choose to indulge it. But what will it do to my laboratory? If I take that sensation, what will it transform?
Everyone has free will. This is a gift from God. Do what thou wilt. This is the whole of the law. But know that you will have to answer for all of your deeds. You can do whatever you want. Many masters have given us these teachings over thousands of years. They were there but hidden. Those who worked and earned it gained entry. Now the time is too short, so the doors have been opened for everyone. Anyone who wants it can find it pretty easily now. You're still free to do what you want. You can take the teachings and use them and apply them and liberate yourself from suffering if that's what you want. Similarly, you can take these teachings and think about them and continue to indulge yourself in all your suffering and you will bear the consequences for that. You can indulge in all your desires the way you always have, and you will bear the consequences for that. I'll give you a hint. You will become a demon. There's no way around it. What is a demon? The first type of demon is like all of us. A soul who is separated from God to a very large percentage, who simply indulges in desire and has no cognizance of the fact, and no desire to change. The second type is the one that knows he's a demon and enjoys it. You can move from the first to the second type in a matter of days. It's very easy. Humanity is so corrupted with ego, with karma. You can go out and in a matter of days become a fully fledged demon, what we call a black magician, a beginner in that, but nonetheless awake with powers. And you might enjoy that for a while because you'll have a lot of nice sensations, you'll have powers, you might be able to get a lot of attention and make money and have lots of sex and do all the things that your desires have always wanted. But there is a consequence for everything that we do. It is the law of nature. Every action has an effect. Moreover, if you study the law of karma, you will discover what we explained in other courses, that every action creates effects that are far more powerful than the original action. If you commit harmful action, the consequences are magnified. Similarly, if you commit beneficial action, the consequences are magnified, amplified, much greater than the original action. So do what you want. Follow your inclination. Pursue life the way you feel it is fit to pursue. And be prepared to reap the consequences of your actions. So if you are considering any path, you're well advised to first contemplate its likely outcome. Study the scriptures in detail. Study the teachings of those who have gone before you and learn from their experience. And you will discover what we have taught you today. Desire is the cause of all suffering. If you want to be free of suffering, you have to purge yourself of desire. There's no way around that. Yes?
You said in the... I have a few questions. Beginning, my first question was Ra. How do you spell the Hebrew word of Ra?
Ra is spelled Resh Ayin in Hebrew.
My second question is, midway through the lesson, you said that in alchemy, you need to, in order to dissolve every single thing that is produced, you need to concentrate the. I can really. Well, you show the pictures, and you said that the process in which you can dissolve these things, it's by concentration. So you use the analogy of the total, right? And what would you say in this laboratory, if we were to call the Earth laboratory, what is a few hints or tools in order for us to do that?
Okay. The work to successfully dissolve the compound elements in the psyche has two primary aspects, which cannot be separated from each other. The first is, during your daily life, to be in a state of cognizant awareness at all times. And Samael Aun Weor called this self-observation and self-remembering. It is a state of directed attention, where one is here and now, observing what's outside of us and what's inside of us simultaneously. So to learn that takes a lot of training, because we don't have that skill now. We're asleep. That skill has to be developed in combination with the second half, which is meditation. It's the same technique of directed attention, but with the senses, the external senses, cut off. Eyes closed, body relaxed, not listening outside, not seeing outside, not tasting, not touching, not smelling, but all the attention inside. Replaying all the experiences of that day and revisiting them to see those compound elements for what they are. We call that retrospection. So there are these two parts of the puzzle, and they take years of training to learn. They do not come easily. Years of training. And these two halves are of one thing. We call it psychoanalytical work. It's the work in the laboratory. The body is the lab. The work is to be in that lab, concentrated, and observing all the elements at play. Everything and how they work together, inside and outside.
You used the words that really caught my attention. When you cited that example, you talked about that the easier route in order for us to just indulge in our pleasure is just to not pay attention to them, but there will be purged by the process of nature.
That's right.
And you use the analogy of hell, right? So you use that. You said that there is the element of pressure, and then the element of heat.
Mm-hmm.
And how will you put those two things into practice in terms of the same practice?
Okay.
Techniques that you gave.
It's a good question. The heat and pressure happens on its own. When you pass through difficulties in life, you start to pass through that heat and pressure. The difficulties of your life are where the circumstances are being modified on your behalf so that you will see yourself. You will see your ego. That brings up heat and pressure in your laboratory. For like the example I gave of you might lose your job, right? Everything in you starts boiling. In your heart, in your mind, in your body, in your house, at your workplace, you're boiling. That's the heat and pressure. It's all those forces shaking you psychologically so that all the submerged elements will become visible. On the other hand, now that's in the case of someone who's working in this work by will, who's conserving their energies and trying to change for the better. The same process happens in those people who are not doing this work. It's happening to the entirety of humanity, but slower. All of humanity is getting heat and pressure. Society is heating up. The economic situation is getting more difficult. The political situation is getting more difficult. The environmental situation, the situation with food, with water, with everything in society on the planet is getting more intense from year to year, and it's going to continue getting more intense. That's that heat and pressure that's rising from karma. So these are the two ways. You do it on your own, yourself, in order to avoid being caught up in the worst one, which is the one society is going to face as a whole. It's going to be far worse, not only because of the suffering involved, but because it will be filled with ignorance. No one's going to understand what's going on. No one's going to be able to fix it. They will just be purged by nature over a long period. Whereas if you do it yourself, it's intense, it's difficult, but you do it with knowledge. You do it developing a connection with the divine, and you do it knowing and seeing that there's an end, and that you will come out of it pure and free of suffering.
And this is my last question.
Okay.
You said you mentioned all throughout the lesson the process of the system of karma.
Right.
Is there a way out of karma?
Yeah, the way out of karma is karma itself. The word karma comes from a Sanskrit root that just means act. Action. All karma says is, for every action, there is a reaction, there is a result, a consequence. For every cause, there is an effect. So any effect that exists was produced by a cause. That's all karma says. Right? Simple. When I say we have karma, it means that we are bearing the consequences of all of our previous actions. So how's the way out of that? It is through karma itself, by performing superior actions. Actions that produce superior results, the results that we want. So if we want out of suffering, we have to act in a way that produces a state of non-suffering. So we produce good actions. We learn instead of acting on lust, which creates suffering, we act through chastity. Instead of acting through anger, which produces suffering, we act through love. And in that way, we learn to change. And we change the dynamic of our laboratory to produce good results in our life. And that spreads outward. As you remember, I said also that the law states that for every action that's performed, the effect is more powerful than the original action. The effects are more widespread. So when we produce a harmful action, we create a lot of harmful results. It's like the waves in nature. If you throw a stone, the action of that throwing is very small. The energy it takes to throw it, but the consequences ripple out. Not only through the pond that it hits, but the sound that travels. It affects the whole pond, the whole body of water. Many creatures may hear it. You know what I'm saying? That effect is widespread. Depends on the action. But the same is true with us psychologically.
So, that you're saying is, I guess, be the change that you
Yeah, that's exactly it. Be the change you want to see.
that you want to see in the world.
Right. That's it. Be the change you want to see. Learn to become that. And you spread that to others as well. It's a very powerful way. And that's the nature of the path. Yeah. There's a question in the back.
You talked about the expansiveness of consciousness.
Right.
And then you spoke about the breaking down of the impermanent elements.
Right.
And the egos. Are they related in any way from a practical standpoint?
Absolutely. The application of these elements in our psychological laboratory, the key to unraveling compound elements is the application of the fifth force, which is the quintessence. And that is an application that's applied consciously. So when we're dealing with our ordeals in our lives, the surest method to transform our ordeals into beneficial circumstances is to have that expansive point of view that comes from the Akash. Awakened consciousness, in other words. Fire, Kundalini, it's related to the Divine Mother. When we have that expansive point of view, our consciousness is present. The presence of God is there. Our access to wisdom, what in Sanskrit is called buddhi. Remember the Buddha was awakened under the Bodhi tree, which comes from bud, which means to awaken. So that buddhi, that feminine force that's here above Saturn, is that quintessence who's able to see everything for what it is. That's why she's weighing those elements on the scale of Tob and Ra. That insight, the vision that we get through that aspect of consciousness, is what can perceive reality. In other words, what is beyond the compound things. That's what gives us the vision to see the truth for what it is, to separate the dense from the coarse. That separation is what's happening here in Saturn. And that's a matter of conscious insight. Seeing, well, this situation with my job is ridiculous. And we reflect on that. Okay, maybe I lose my job. Well, I'm such and such an age now. I've never starved. God's always provided for me. I may have suffered, but I've gotten by. I've managed. So likewise, why can't I manage now? What's so impossible about my situation now that I should be so worried? It's that expansive view that remembers God and that separates the dense from the coarse. It's quite simple in that regard. But when you look at it through meditation and go deeper, you start to see the roots of how those compound elements were created in you. Not only in the immediate situation, but also previous ones, even in previous existences. And that's how you start to delve into the depths of the earth, your own earth, to extract all the elements out and to purify them. It's a long process. It takes a lot of patience. But it's very powerful. That's where you start to go down into the earth with very powerful tools and pull out all the best elements you have inside in order to cleanse them. It's that expansive view. So they're completely related to each other. There's a question in the back, I think, right?
Yeah. In the picture of the goddess Kali, so she has a compass on her right hand. If not, what is it?
Okay.
And can you elaborate about the black crow?
Well, the first part, the black crow in alchemy represents the process of death. The crow is a symbol of alchemy, of Saturn. And Saturn, of course, relates to death. And the crow is also related with Odin, or Wotan, which is the symbol of Keter, the innermost, he who is becoming. So the two are totally related to each other. This image of Kali, the tool that she has in this outstretched hand, is an embalmer's tool. It looks a bit like a compass, but it's actually a tool that's used to separate the flesh from the bone. It's a tool that's used to dismember dead bodies. So it's a symbol, of course, of the process of separating the gross from the subtle. Yes?
How do we know with all the heat and the pressure and the work of the innermost giving us everything, when to, like, say to someone, a friend or someone like a spouse, if they're constantly abusive and constantly, giving you trouble? How do you decipher, let me work with more heat and pressure, or what, take the expansive point of view and just kind of absorb everything, or
When do you respond and when do you just take it?
and where you draw the line and isolate people?
Where you draw the line is if someone's going to harm you physically. If someone's going to endanger your life or someone else's life, you have to stop them. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that for someone who's genuinely working in this type of work, we receive protection for ourselves physically. Psychologically, we need the ordeals, and they will get hot, and they will get painful, and we need that, because that's what pulls out all of our impurities so we can see it. So we have to do our best to not merely bear it, but to transform it. And this is the most difficult part. I mentioned in the early part of this lecture that we have this tendency to swing on a pendulum in our reactions to all things. And this is a great example of that. If someone in your life is giving you a really hard time, persecuting you verbally, emotionally, really aggressive perhaps, or passive aggressive with you and creating a lot of problems for you, we tend to react in one of two ways. We either try to ignore them and repress our feelings about it and just not deal with it and just bear it. Or we react outwards to them to push them away and tell them to stop. Both are out of balance in the psychological work. The way to properly manage that type of scenario is to comprehend it. To neither indulge or avoid. To not crave or repress. But instead to be in the middle and understand. It's most likely that if you really understood the point of view of the person who is persecuting you, it wouldn't bother you. In my own case, I have a person who's been persecuting me and causing a lot of problems for me. And it's been very difficult for me to retain my appreciation for that person and my patience and my love for that person. So my reflection has been on the suffering of that person, putting myself in their position to try to understand what they feel and how they see not only their own life, but how they see me. And through that process, I've developed a lot of compassion for that person. And now, if that person wants to come and beat me with a stick, I won't care. If it helps them to relieve their suffering, I will bear it. It's okay, because I love them. I will do that for them. So that's a slow process and painful. But that's generally how we need to approach our problems. We need to try to understand other people and not be selfish. To try to comprehend how the others see it. And what will happen is quite magical. whatever our circumstances, when you truly reach that point where you get it, where you understand the other person and their point of view and the bigger picture other than your own selfish point of view, that situation will completely change and go away and will never happen again. And then you have new problems that'll be worse. You will. That's the way it works. That's the way this science works. That would be a success. Don't expect that your life is going to all of a sudden become rosy and easy and you'll just start to wear white robes and walk down the street and everybody will respect you. No. The further along you go in this, the harder it gets. Because you're going deeper and deeper into more dense areas of your mind. More dense, harder. So you need more energy to pulverize that earth, to free the elements that are trapped there. It's difficult. But thankfully, we have a great helper in the corner of our boxing ring, which is God. You have the divine on your side if you can remember the presence of the divine. You had a question?
The representation of the Adam and Eve, as far as the color, the red and the white.
Right.
Can you elaborate on the specific colors, the white and the red?
Yep. The red and the white are very symbolic in alchemy and tantra, which are the same tradition. The red and the white represent the solar and lunar channels of energy. Between alchemy and tantra, they are reversed. So somehow in the transmission of that teaching in the two places, those color meanings got switched. In the West, the red generally means solar, but in the East, it generally means lunar, for whatever reason. But the ultimate symbol is the same thing. They represent Adam and Eve, solar and lunar forces. That are psychological forces and physical, chemical, spiritual forces.
How to differentiate between humility versus a negative victim, submissive behavior? And what is good taste for the spirit? Satan.
What tastes good to the spirit is real knowledge, real gnosis, real comprehension. What the spirit wants, which is our own inner ruach, is this knowledge that comes when its original essence is freed from the compound elements. So when these defects are radically transformed, Saturn tastes that freed element. That is the taste that the spirit wants. It's the freed essence, the freed consciousness, real knowledge, real knowing, redemption, resurrection. This is the bread, or lechem, the manna, that nourishes the soul. In the Bible, it's stated that the Israelites survived on manna from heaven. That manna, mem nun, is the seed that's hidden in the water that is trapped here and that is freed and redeemed through the transformation of those elements in ourselves, spiritually and psychologically. So that's the spirit. The spirit's food. Our spirit is nourished, in other words, through death. Sounds strange, but it's true. And that's why all the religious symbolism is based on death. If you look closely at all religious symbolism, you see that for the redemption of the soul to occur, there's an awful lot of death. Jesus died, Moses died, Muhammad dies. All of the great deities die in order for that ultimate redemption to occur. The other part of the question was about, what was it about? It was about
Between humility and negative victims.
victimization and being in submissive behavior. Well, as I explained before, we tend towards one side or another of a pendulum. Some of us have a type of personality that tends towards being victimized by others. And we blame the aggressor, but generally speaking, the victim is as much to blame. victims tend to allow themselves to be victims. I'm not talking about every case, but psychologically speaking, it is true. Some of us have more of the aggressive type of personality, and some of us have a victim type of personality. And that has to be changed. The aggressor needs to become someone who loves others and not trying to control them. The victim needs to become someone who can control themselves and not need to be controlled by others. So we have to analyze our own behavior and discover what mixture we have of these pendulums in our psyche. Any other question? Anything else here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about the pendulum swing, and you give this example about the job. I guess we also have to watch the other side of the pendulum swing, when everything is going good, and we're hypnotized by, like we're friendly with our, like our co-workers, they all like us and all this everything. There is no problem. That's what we think, right? So we also have to be observant in that sense also. It's not just problems that we're looking for.
Yeah, the comment is that we have to be aware even when things are going so-called good for us. Well, in the books that Samael Aun Weor wrote for us, he stated a number of times that easy situations in life are the worst for the work on ourselves. And people read that and think, this guy's crazy. Because our desires tell us that we want to cultivate that easy situation so that then we can work on ourselves and have our spiritual life. Once we have our millions of dollars in the bank and we're successful and famous and everybody loves us, then we'll change. But we've got it all backwards. We have to be very defined in our purpose in living. If our purpose in life is simply to acquire possessions and be respected and loved, that's easy. All you have to do that is give society what it wants. Feed the lust and pride of society, and they will love you. But if you really want God to love you, you have to be purged of lust and pride. You have to become nothing. And society will not like you, because that runs contrary to society's interests. So you have to be clear in what you want and defined, and understand that once you define yourself, you will face that decision constantly and have to define yourself again and again. And you'll be tempted in every way possible. If you've defined yourself for God, to serve your innermost and to renounce materialism, the world will do its best to convince you otherwise. In every way possible. You will see all your friends get rich and successful. Your family will criticize you, gossip about you, attack you. You may lose your job. You may be offered very beautiful and wonderful circumstances with lots of money and a big house and a lot of fame to test your resolve. And your mind will tell you, I can do both. I can get rich and self-realize. The ego is very deceptive and very clever. It's very, very rare for someone to truly hold fast to the divine. It's very easy to serve the world. Another question in the back?
When I try to be humble, people abuse me. And it feels unhealthy to allow it.
It feels what to allow it?
Unhealthy to allow it.
Okay, the question is, when I am humble, people abuse me. That is wonderful. That's wonderful. It feels unhealthy to allow people to abuse you. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. You have to speak the truth. You have to defend yourself and what you hold as true and important. And people won't like it, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to be silent and take it and not react out of respect for the opinions of others. But to be truly humble is a beautiful thing. It matters nothing what anyone else thinks of it. Nothing. The only thing that matters is your relationship with the divine. If you are acting according to the instructions and guidance you receive from your innermost, let the world condemn you, because God will be on your side. Who cares what anyone else says or thinks? If God is behind you, who can stand against him? Her. It. So we have to be strong. Any other question? Yes.
Yes, you talked about meditating at the end of the day on the events of the day, and I was wondering, is there like a similar technique for things that happened in the past? Like I think about like traumatic events that happened to me maybe as far back as my childhood, stuff that were done to me, stuff I done to other people, regrets about not being satisfied with the way I reacted in certain situations, and it seems like there's a lot of energy trapped up in these events in the past, and how do I get that energy back and transform that?
That's a great question. Yes, the technique is the same, and I'll briefly explain meditation. When we talk about meditation, we are not talking about mantra recitation, visualizing an image, or concentrating on a dot or a mantra or any other thing. What we mean by meditation is to get information. It's an exchange. It is an investigation. It is an acquisition of knowledge. Meditation, properly stated, is a state of consciousness that is free of the senses and the three brains. A state of consciousness in which we are awake, but not limited by the five senses, by the body, by emotion, by thought. But we are awake and perceiving inside. Not in darkness, but seeing through the awakened inner eye, which we call imagination. We think imagination is made up, is fantasy, because that's all we use our imagination for nowadays. But the word imagination comes from image, which is to see. And some people invented a word for that in France a couple hundred years ago. They called it clairvoyance, which means clear seeing in French. Imagination and clairvoyance are the same thing. It is to see without the physical senses. Proper meditation is where we extract our attention from the motor instinctual sexual brain, extract it from emotion, extract it from thought, so that we're no longer paying attention to the body, to emotions, to thoughts. Instead, our consciousness is completely engaged with images, imagination. This has nothing to do with the body, with the brain, with anything physical. Someone who's properly trained in this manner will experience what we call samadhi or ecstasy. It's a state in which the consciousness perceives reality in different levels and is able to penetrate any period of time, past, present, or future, in order to extract information and to see the truth of any given thing. The ability to reach that is capable of anyone to do it. It's our natural state. Any human being can acquire this ability. We already use it in a negative way every time we lay down to go to sleep and dream. We're using the same technique, but without cognizance. In meditation, properly stated, you learn to do it consciously. To leave the body, to see reality, to gain information. So in that way, you can investigate all of the compound elements, air, fire, water, and earth, in your psyche, in every level of the mind. Your subconsciousness and unconsciousness, the very dense levels of the mind, are all these compound elements that are made up of your memories. Of all the experiences you've had in this existence and all of your previous existences in which you were asleep, all of those experiences were compounded and created your subconscious and unconscious levels. Liberation from suffering is when you extract the consciousness out of all of that, and it is all destroyed. That's liberation. That's a long process. Meditation is the way you do it. There is no exception. Doesn't matter what your religion is, doesn't matter what you call this technique. You can call it anything you want, but it is the only way to be freed from suffering. By understanding everything that is in your mind and separating the gross from the subtle. So yes, you can use this technique on what happened to you today, what happened to you yesterday, last month, last year, when you were a child, and your previous body, and the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. In fact, that is the work itself. But we have to start where we are. Where we are now is we don't have this ability yet because we're not awake. We don't have the Akash fully inflamed and awakening all our inner senses. So we work here and now, starting to acquire energy and save energy and work on ourselves today. And as we awaken and learn to manage these skills and these energies, that expansiveness improves and radiates outward until our ability to perceive extends far beyond physicality and goes deep into the contents of our mind. Thank you.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Help Gnostic Radio to help others. Make a donation by visiting gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the wide variety of resources available on our websites. Thank you for your support. May all beings be happy.